We're on.
Hey, what's up? Welcome to the anew video podcast conversation. This is Aaron.
And this is Bo.
We've got a special guest here today. His name's Arthur Haines. We want to thank him for coming on.
Yeah.
Arthur?
Yeah, arthurhaines.com, by the way.
arthurhaines.com.
Yeah. I actually know the URL this time as opposed to the last time I was guessing at it, which
Right.
probably isn't a good idea. But.
Right. And we're really fortunate to be here at Arthur's house actually doing this video conversation. And it's really cool, surrounded by some beautiful wilderness, and it's a really nice backdrop and setting for some good discussion. We want to thank Arthur for letting us come here.
Yeah, I have to say, Arthur, we had to hike in, actually. I thought he was joking, but we actually did have to hike in, which is pretty interesting. But we ate probably the best food the best food I've had in a while. It was amazing, actually.
Pretty much a completely wild meal.
Yeah. There was some venison and some wild rice with some, what was that type of tea?
We had white pine tea.
Oh, white pine tea. Yes. It was amazing.
And then our wild grape mead.
Yes, wild grape mead.
Yeah, that was amazing. First time I've ever really had that much.
Aaron's gone.
Wild food. Yeah, I'm completely hammered. But it's fine.
But
okay.
Yeah, so we're going to go over, we have a lot of questions that we want to cover, and hopefully we can get to at least half of them. Because this is, Arthur is an expert. We're not going to pull any punches with that. He's an expert, so he's got a lot to say. So we're going to try to get in as much as we can. And Aaron and I will try not to bore you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Arthur put you in awe.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And Arthur's an expert regarding, wild foods, primitive skills, foraging, ancestral people. And one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to Arthur was to just sort of talk about how we can live better, having a better understanding of wild foods and ancestral people and more wild cultures. And we got to this sort of intersect with what Arthur does when Bo and I got into the paleo diet, which we talked about a bunch of times, which is sort of it's a supposed mimicry of what our Paleolithic ancestors ate. Right. And, we try to mimic that now to obtain more health. And, Arthur kind of shed new lights on that whole concept for us. And it's definitely really opened my mind to some of the dogma that surrounds paleo, and I would say diets and what we should eat in general, because I think this is something that everybody really struggles with. Is what do I eat? And you find something that you think, oh, that makes so much sense. Like the evolutionary concept of what we should eat made a lot of sense to Bo and I, but we realized that even within the structure of a paleo diet, there's still a lot of dogma there. And Arthur kind of introduced us to, this whole other world of wild foods and introduced some questions that I've really taken seriously about the paleo diet.
So Arthur, why don't you just kind of give us a bit of I know we've kind of tried to speak for you here. We're going to let the man speak. Let the man speak. So anything that we haven't covered, if you want to just talk to us about kind of where you came, where you see this with what the importance of what you're doing and the way that you gather your own food and you actually have this, you talk a lot about health sovereignty and all that.
Right. Well, I guess the place I like to start out is getting people to realize that a paleo diet was based on all wild food.
Yep.
No genetic modification. It consumed plants and animals, raw and cooked, and this can all be documented. So it's good for people to step away from these belief systems where, everything has to be cooked or everything has to be raw, or we can only eat plants, or we need to eat almost exclusively animals, because obviously that varied depending on where people were located on the globe. In other words, it varied with your ancestry. But like you guys are saying, getting away from some of that dogma, because obviously when people go to the farm stand or the supermarkets to buy their foods, they're eating things that paleo people didn't eat.
Right.
Paleo people didn't eat cows. They didn't exist. Paleo people didn't eat chicken eggs. Chickens didn't exist. Their wild progenitor did, but the chicken didn't. And with the animals, we've seen minor modifications from their ancestral form. And really what we were trying to do in many cases was make the animals more docile so that they would essentially accept us in the leadership role, so that we weren't trampled, gored, bitten, and scratched to death while we tried to,
it wouldn't be good.
Interact with these animals. But when it comes to the plants that we buy in the supermarket are very, very different from what paleo people ate. They've virtually every single thing in the supermarket regarding plants has been genetically modified through breeding and sometimes also laboratory methods to create something that often doesn't even look like its wild progenitor. And in the process of this changing of the wild plant to the cultivated plant, there has often been a loss of nutrition, a loss of phytochemistry. In fact, that was one of the ways that we made plants edible. We can imagine if you have this somewhat toxic plant food, we might be able to leach those toxins or anti-nutrients out. We might be able to cook them out, or we can breed them out. And that's what our produce that we buy at the store, we have bred the medicine out that paleo hominids were exposed to on a regular basis. So we first have to just understand that the paleo diet, as is proposed by many people who represent themselves as people who have expertise in the paleo diet, and there are people out there that fit that bill, are essentially all proposing a diet that is very much not paleo, right? And so if you truly wanted to have a diet that mimicked what our ancestors ate, you would try to consume as much wild food that is not been modified by human manipulation as you can. And so just to start right there and recognize that there's nothing wrong with that. That's not meant to be judgmental. But if you're trying to follow a paleo diet and all your food comes from the supermarket, you're already a long way away from a paleo diet. So then to bicker over, well, should I eat any legumes or grains? It just becomes sort of ridiculous at that point because you're already way off.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we were getting at is, just following sort of the paleo blogs and the paleo community for a while. There's a lot of people that get really defensive and angry. If someone says, well, there's dairy in this recipe, or someone ate a little bit of grains once, and people just flip out. Well, you're not paleo. This is paleo. That's not paleo. So I like your point here that is anybody really
nobody is paleo, and that also includes me and my partner. We eat more wild food than anybody in this state that I know, and we still also rely on our local farmers for various foods. So, I mean, we're not paleo in that strict sense either.
I think the important aspect that you bring into from talking to you is the local idea, where you're actually going into your local area and getting, and of course you said wild a lot, but when Arthur says wild, he actually means it, that, things that are actually growing without having to plant them, without having to have a garden. Literally, if you have a yard, Arthur can make a salad. I've seen it happen. It's pretty impressive.
Right. I mean, a lot of people have focused on, consuming a paleo diet because of the health benefits to that person.
Right.
And that's where we tend to go in this world, in this time, in this country right now, is what does it do to the individual right now? No one's realizing that a real attempt to mimic a paleo diet, which would be eating wild foods, does mean that people would be going out into intact landscapes. In other words, we're not clearing the forest and plowing the soil to grow genetically modified produce. We would actually be leaving ecosystems alone, and then it would only be upon us to have the responsibility to learn how to gather from those areas conscientiously so that we do so in either a sustainable or, better yet, a rejuvenative manner. And the point is, when we look around the world, do we actually want to sustain this level of damage, or would we rather do less damage? And that's where the rejuvenative concept comes in.
And I think that's where some of your lectures, listening to the correlation between wild foods and your understandings of conservation. So in other words, if we understand how beneficial wild foods are to us, and then we see as we destroy the natural world how much we're actually losing, how much more important it becomes to sort of save the natural world. I always found that very, very interesting. And well, what do you say to someone though who's living in a city? There's not much wilderness around them. Is it just more of an indication of when you really start to understand the importance of wild foods and what we've lost, and you really start to understand how devastating all of this urban development is? I mean, but then there's the other side of someone saying, well, I'm doing the best I can. I'm eating a paleo diet, which is as close to a mimicry as I can. So what would you say to those people?
We do our best, right? And if we're truly people that are striving to limit the damage that we cause on this planet. In other words, if we are truly interested in the next generation or generations and the other than human persons that we share this planet with, we would be trying to eat as local as possible and as least damaging as possible all the time. I mean, people that are living in urban centers, I mean, there are some places where there are parks big enough to gather from, and that is kind of allowed. But for the most part, I don't want to grow my food in those settings. I know there are many people that are really excited and into that. But that's simply not the setting I want my food coming from. There's far too much pollution, and plants take that up. Hopefully that I don't want to get off on that path and sort of
we could go forever.
And because I don't want to down people that are making every attempt they can at being self-sufficient, even in an urban setting, because that's really applaudable. But again, I want my food to also come from as clean an area as we can get it, because that impacts my health and the health of the next generation that I'm sort of fostering or donating to.
I think the idea of what I love about what you do is me and Aaron talk a lot about increasing personal freedoms. And I think there's a big movement lately for people to kind of increase that freedom by educating themselves about foraging. And there aren't many good resources. You're certainly, I think, the foremost resource in probably the U.S. And I know you're very humble, but from what I've researched, you certainly are. And what better way to increase your freedom than to actually have the ability to go out and to gather your own food? Not you don't have to be, are you a good farmer, like you said, and cultivate it, water it, get some fertilizer, to actually go out in any area and actually gather your own food and understand what you have a deeper connection to the food, because you actually understand, okay, this plant offers this and this animal offers this, and you're very in tune with gathering that locally and seasonally. And I think if anybody ever, a lot of people talk about these preppers, as they call them now, I think, right? And what do? They store up a bunch of, I don't know what they store, rice or something, but guns. Imagine if every day you were, guns, right?
Tanks.
Imagine if every day you were actually prepping by increasing the knowledge and the skill that that you require to actually be free. And I'll just add one thing and let you go off on how you think it increases freedom. But I know I've taken a couple of classes, outdoor survival classes, I guess you would call it, and you were a part of one of those. And drawing a parallel between jiu-jitsu and primitive skills, I think is very, I think they're very close, because one, using a bow drill or even making a bow drill and the technique that it requires to actually just get a coal and the amount of, concentration and the importance that you have, and, time is of the essence. You got to make sure that everything's set up. It's a knowledge that I think is way underrated. I've written about it with the 7 billion children. And you are certainly, definitely one to go to for all that. So how do you see that playing into your life?
Well, I mean, the wood stove that's behind you that's heating this house has never been started with a match, a lighter, or any device like that. We literally do start our fires, whether it's an outdoor fire, the wood barbecue, the inside stove. It started with some friction fire method, whether that be a hand drill or a bow drill. And that's how we stay practiced. You might think that's kind of trivial or isn't that cute, but the reality is we're maintaining expertise in a really important skill here in Maine, because Fire keeps us warm.
Yep.
It keeps biting insects away from us. Anyone who spends any time on this landscape in June knows that it can be hell. But also what people don't realize is fire is a way of detoxifying plants,
Yep.
of cleaning water that you're unsure of its cleanliness. It's also a way to make tools,
Yep.
containers, and other things. So this is how we pull in these ancestral technologies into our life, and that's just one example of what we do. But when you talk about farming, I mean, farming is a way toward self-reliance. But most people that farm use gas-powered rototillers,
Right.
use a tractor. They use a lot of machines that depend on fossil fuels to do their gardening. And of course, if we were prepping for the societal collapse and transportation systems go offline and you have no way to get fuel, now you're stuck needing to do that all by hand. Now, certainly we can do that. If we're forced to do that, people will do that. But now what I want you to imagine is what's going to happen. A mass exodus of people out of urban areas.
Yep.
They're going to strip the resources that are there. I mean, let's face it, the buildings are going to be clogged with human feces in no time if we really had no electricity just to move this stuff around. And what happens is a garden locks you to a place for a time, and you have to tend this garden the entire time so that you can get the benefit of your work at the end of the growing season, right?
Yep.
So now think about it, though. All you have to do to disrupt somebody if you want to take their home, take their land, is destroy their food supply. And if they're fixed to a field, and I know there are lots of people that, stockpile guns and bullets, and they really are convinced that they're going to take on, 2,000 armed people at a time. I mean, the numbers of people that we're talking about, Nicole and I would be driven from this home. We know we would lose that home if people in the numbers that exist came here to take it from us. It's not a fight we're going to make.
But that's probably not the enemy that...
But we have to rely on the forest, as I'm looking out the window, that we've spent time trying to learn how to live within. And paramount is how you feed yourself.
Right.
A landscape like Maine, depending on what time of year we're talking about, going without food for even but a few days. I mean, people talk about, I could go 3 weeks without food. You can't if you're actually moving and doing things.
And in the winter,
So, let's not even put extreme temperatures in there. So what you have to remember is that agriculture, not only did it give us less nutrient-dense food, and that's a documentable fact, but what it also gave us was a need to be tame.
Yep.
When the bureaucrats came around who were backed by soldiers and taxed farmers, what were they going to do? Give up their buildings, their equipment, their animals, and all their investment in that field and move on, as hunter-gatherers did when agriculturalists moved into their areas? Or are they going to say, shoot, okay, what's the tax?
Yep.
And it actually essentially enslaved people in one fashion of the word, because we became dependent on the homes and the equipment that we use to raise our food.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, Aboriginal people, indigenous people, and their ancestors moved massive distances, sometimes daily, just in the search of nappable stone that they used to make their tools. I mean, they're looking now at these incredible distances that people move from places they spent time hundreds of kilometers to get nappable stone and return to the areas where they used them to hunt.
Wow.
and our, sort of our Olympic caliber runners come in third place in terms of the distance they move.
Wow.
Early paleo humans, massive distances. The more recent, not modern day, but more recent year indigenous people, and then our Olympic athletes in terms of how much they moved around on a weekly basis.
Talk about a commute.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was a huge part of their lifestyle. But they were adept at making the things they needed from the landscape when they needed it, as opposed to being tied to, you hear it, survivalists, 2 is 1 and 1 is none, because if your piece of equipment breaks, You don't have it anymore. But that means that's a piece of equipment that you can't manufacture again. Right. And of course, the indigenous could manufacture everything that they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So we know that life changed a lot following the agricultural revolution for many humans anyway. I just want to get your take on this. So do you think it was the type of thing, I mean, was it kind of common sense? Were people thinking, well, this makes sense that we start to produce, cultivate our own crops rather than having to rely on seasonal changes, having to go out and, you know, harvest our own food when we can have it right here? The same way with raising animals rather than having to worry about going out and hunting. Did it make sense to begin that type of process of animal husbandry and agriculture?
Yeah, there's actually, when they look at indigenous people around the world, there's really no break between hunter-gatherers and agriculturalists. Mm-hmm. And I say that because even hunter-gatherers may have intentionally sown seeds near their villages, near where they lived. Mm-hmm. Or they may have grown things for medicine, or they recognize that, well, this is a patch that I can tend a little bit. I'm not doing anything, at least intentionally, to the genetics of these plants, but I'm going to make sure that they grow vigorously because it's a plant that I use. Mm-hmm. And that tending is bordering on agriculture. Mm-hmm. in a way. At least we would call it horticulture. Mm-hmm. So hunter-gatherers did practice horticulture. And to be sure, the first plants that were domesticated by people around the world were not always so drastically different from their wild counterparts. Mm-hmm. And so they were still fairly nutrient dense. The people still enjoyed relatively good health. But of course, the more we relied on agricultural foods and the more we changed them as time went on, that's when we started to notice that people were having problems. Their faces couldn't grow wide enough anymore. Their wisdom teeth don't emerge anymore, but they become impacted. Pelvises get smaller. Mm-hmm. Right? These sorts of changes that we saw in the physical form of people. So it happened in such a gradual way that there was no point that someone could say, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. Mm-hmm. It just took place in little bitty steps. But with agriculture, we have to remember, came the first opportunity to amass wealth. Yep. We could amass wealth in the form of dried, stored food, which could be used to pay other classes of people.
Specialized.
Yeah. Right. And that included soldiers.
Right.
Which allowed a smaller group of individuals to exert their will over other people. Mm-hmm. Which then means, well, you don't have a leader who is sort of supported by a soldier class who is really enjoying a high life. They don't want to give that up. Regardless of what it might be doing to the human genome, generation by generation, mm-hmm. that's not something that's easy to give up.
Right.
And so we see, obviously, not just a perpetuation of agriculture, but an increase in its use for our food.
I think real quick, I'm just going to interject and say, Aaron and I talked on the last podcast that we did about thoughtless living. And when you're bringing up the ideas of, wisdom teeth becoming impacted, another example, maybe, appendicitis and all these other conditions, we just assume that, our bodies are just going wrong. Like it's some kind of sick joke that we have these wisdom teeth that have to be surgically removed. Yeah. It's like, well, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's stated as matter of fact when you go to the dentist. So
it's
of course
like,
they have to come out.
That's just the way it is. You take that out. And we never really question, okay, what happened before? Right. What happened before we had the ability to have surgical procedures so that our face didn't rot off of our bodies, from our teeth, or we didn't die from these horrible types of, which is very common. Mm-hmm. Just the other day, someone was telling me they just took their roommate to the hospital because of appendicitis. Right. And now we're finding that the appendix actually serves a very important probiotic purpose.
Yes.
And it
recolonizes our gut.
Right. So going off this whole thoughtless living, I mean, if you're just accepting that, we have these horribly designed bodies that we depend on all these, and we've done it to ourselves. We do now, like you said, we've changed the epigenome, as you would call it. So we actually do, in a way, have gotten in so deep that sometimes for most of us, even if we eat perfectly, we're dealing with things that have happened in the past. But thinking about how we can change ourselves and improve ourselves on any sliding scale,
right?
Just by improving nutrition through wild foods.
What people need to understand is there is, in the scientific community, a real dogma about genetic heritage and genetic heritability and genetic disorders. And really what this has done is serve to take sovereignty, to take hope away from people. You see, well, your family is rich in people with diabetes, let's say. And so, well, you're going to get it because it's genetics. And it's absolutely not true. What people inherit is a lifestyle.
Exactly.
And in that lifestyle is a manner of eating that might be very rich in processed carbohydrates. And when that next generation also succumbs to diabetes, the scientists said, see, I showed you, right?
Yeah.
But in fact, I come from a family where my grandfather's generation, for example, all of them died young as a result of diabetes. Many lost their sight. Some lost limbs as a result. I mean, diabetes was really huge.
It's an epidemic.
To put it very straightforward, it was.
Yeah.
And the fact is that does not doom me to diabetes. It does require me to recognize that I can't continue to sort of passively inherit that lifestyle, that diet in specific in this case, and I have to change that. And as a result, I'm fortunate not to have to deal with the complications of diabetes, which obviously shorten lifespans on average by 10 to 20 years alone, aside from all of the other complications that people might be dealing with,
metabolic diseases,
like blindness and damage to extremities and that kind of thing. So really, if there's one thing that people really need to understand is they have so much more power and control over their health. They have been completely misled by the role of the actual genome that they inherit, because it's the expression of the genome that is changed. And that expression changes with what you are exposed to in your diet, in your environment, the emotions, etc., that we have to live through. It just is not the case that, if parent A has X, then child B is going to get this. Now, certainly there are some true genetic disorders,
of course,
but they're actually fairly rare compared to what people would express to be, oh, that's genetic.
Right.
Yeah. And just to say, of course, there are some things we can't fix.
Yep.
I have crooked teeth because of the foods that my grandparents and my parents ate.
That's what I was getting at earlier.
I can't eat these straight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But through a good diet and a partner that also engages in that diet, well, I may be able to have a child that has straighter teeth.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
It took generations for us to reach the current form that we're in.
Yeah, it's what your grandmother ate, essentially.
Yeah, and it will take generations for us to repair it. So the thing is a lot of people come into a paleo diet or a healthier way of eating, whatever the diet might be. It's often later in their life when they start realizing they're not immortal, that there's a lot more to diet than just what it does to us. It's also what it does to the plant. And the problem is that the children don't necessarily follow that.
Yeah.
We need children who get brought up in a culture of an eco-conscientious and nutrient-dense diet, who practice it from day one, from before they were born.
Right.
Yeah. And do the same for their child, so that you ultimately end up with being able to correct these narrow features that we all think of as normal, but they're not. Even our indigenous ancestors of Europe didn't look like we do.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up this point, because I was thinking in my own life, as I started to eat more of a paleo type, more conscientious diet, I was expecting everything to just clear up all of my health issues.
Yeah.
Especially when I learned more about epigenetics and the fact that, while I may have a genetic tendency towards some illnesses, I can control that with, gene expression through what I eat, controlling stress, sleeping better, etc.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I still have a lot of issues. I'm certainly far from in perfect health. But then when I started to think, well, I can't control how I ate for most of my life, which was, 30 some odd years
Yeah.
of probably less than ideal eating, especially when I was younger. And then also, as you said, I can't control how my parents ate and how my grandparents ate, et cetera. So I'm still being, affected by some of those decisions, and I will forever. So I like your point, though, because once you start to become more conscious of that, you have to think, in order to have more healthy offspring, we need to start this now and get the ball, trending in the right direction, so that we can create increasingly healthy people to compensate for all the
increasingly more freer people too.
Yeah.
Because I know people that take jobs that they don't want, not because of the pay, but because of the insurance.
Yes.
So that it's not even about what you make anymore. It's about what does that job offer for insurance, because we feel like have lost complete control over our health. Because if we do what we're supposed to do, if we eat, the standard American diet, you're told once you hit 40, you're going to be going to the doctor once a week. You're going to probably on blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication. You're going to have screenings for cancer.
You'll be impotent
all the time.
Viagra.
Right. Yes. Impotence, low testosterone. Don't worry, we'll give you testosterone. So basically what we're doing is we're trying to medicate away these ailments that we're nurturing by essentially living thoughtlessly and just assuming that that's the normal process, that we're supposed to just begin this horrible decline into disability at the age of 40, and that's certainly not the case. And I think what you've brought up, and I think this is very good important, is that a lot of people argue about what was paleo living like, what was paleo life like, but what you're saying is look what we have today. We have indigenous societies today that we can actually look at. We can actually take them and notice that they don't have any of they don't start that decline that we start today.
Yeah. If we start by looking at the actual paleo people, those people that lived, primarily in that, well, depending on whether we're going to look at the upper Paleolithic, the middle Paleolithic, you get my point.
Of course. Yeah.
But a lot of times what we're looking at when people are discussing Paleolithic nutrition is they're looking at a time period approximately in the 300,000 years ago to about 20 or maybe even 10,000 years ago. This kind of period where people have had exposure to certain foods. We may have had physiological changes to be accustomed to those certain foods, and those are the foods that they want to experience in their life. And here's the thing that they need to remember is when we look at the lifespan of, say, Neanderthal, or as many people pronounce it, Neanderthal. When we look at the lifespan of this early human, this archaic human, it wasn't particularly long, right? Yeah. And what they found is that life past 40 was very difficult.
Right.
And part of that was certainly a very rugged lifestyle with a lot of movement and hunting of what were very dangerous animals at close quarters. Mm-hmm. But there's another thing going on here that people aren't considering. Archaic humans were still learning how to extract nutrition from their landscape.
That's true. Yeah.
Something that the more modern indigenous, and I'll say that the modern indigenous are those people that were isolated from modern foods up until the early 1900s. Okay, so talking about these were people that were observed and we can read about that. We're talking about 17, 18, early 1900s when we looked at indigenous people. They actually, in many cases, demonstrated wonderful health, that aboriginal form with all teeth emerging, broader nostrils, very strong both musculature and bone. The actual density and the strength of the bones far exceeds what we're dealing with. But also we're talking about people that on average lived much longer than archaic humans did. Mm-hmm. Whereas it would have been, not necessarily common for Neanderthal to live past 40. That was a rarer event. That was not uncommon with more recent indigenous that were observed. We see certainly there are examples where people living to 50 was considered long life, but there are many more examples of 70 and 80-year-old individuals living active and mentally acute, into their later ages. And so this is sort of brings up the point is people who are interested in the paleo diet, you actually are not looking for the health of paleo people. Remember, we know they succumb to arthritis,
right,
that they experience tooth loss, so meaning they had periodontal infections and suffered other infections that would manifest in a way that could be observed on the bones.
yes,
Right? I don't think there's anyone that is wanting to eat a paleo diet so that they will lose their teeth to infection. Really, what they want is they want the health that has been observed over and over again by different people, but obviously one of the most notable people that we could call on is Weston Price, who photo documented health, vitality, and always happiness of indigenous people. Everybody who were able to experience indigenous people while they were on their traditional diets always describes how happy these people were. That's what we're looking for. And that's way easier to obtain because we know much more about what they ate. And guess what? They did eat grain. They did eat legumes. Some of these traditional cultures relied on dairy and still had superb health, proper form, happiness, nature connection, all of the things that I would argue that a strict follower of the paleo diet should be seeking.
Right.
So grains are sort of the big culprit for paleo people.
How dare you say that around me?
It's my favorite one, Aaron, because there's all kinds of evidence that grains were in fact eaten. I'm not saying that they were necessarily a staple, but they were in fact eaten by paleo people. And in fact, relatives of sorghum, the wild relative, has been found in Neanderthal campsites going back 105,000 years.
Right.
I mean, at as much as 30,000 years ago, they knew enough about grain that they were grinding it and baking it in stone ovens. Like you don't come across a food and you just instantly go, oh, I'll do this with it. You learn about it over a long period of time. Sometimes that starting from the first exposure to a plant, it's thousands of years to reach that level of knowledge to how to properly prepare this when you're coming at it from no one's eaten this before, right? And in fact, we see grain being consumed at archaeological sites. We see cooked grain. In fact, we find cooked starch grains on the teeth of Neanderthal skeletons.
Right.
And so grain is paleo.
Yes. Right. And I know exactly what Arthur's saying. And look, I guess if you were to ask me the way I eat, and I don't like to put a term on it, but I'm very paleo, as most people say. I actually don't. I don't really eat any grains at all. I think what Arthur's saying though is, look, there are certain types of grains, as long as they are not the base of your diet and they are properly prepared, in which you can take that as one small aspect of the diet, but looking at the whole, like you said, the connection to nature, eating the other, meats in wild fish, in all these other greens and whatnot. When you look at the macro diet and you don't start sharpshooting specifically, I think where we went wrong is that we actually most of us consume nothing but grains.
That's
today.
the standard American diet.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a great example of a group of people living on an island in the Scotland area, excuse me. And their staple, one of their dietary staples that was eaten nearly every day, was oats.
Yep.
Now, of course, oat, particularly the oat that they would have been cultivating at that time, was likely not one that contained gluten. So a really important allergen was not present in the oat. Now, just the same, grains do have a preponderance of omega-6 fatty acids, and a heavy reliance on them would promote inflammation and suppress the immune system. That's what we see in the American society. But like you're saying, when we look at their entire diet, even though oats were such a huge portion of their diet, their protective element, their other staple, was wild-caught fish from the ocean, which obviously supplied massive amounts of omega-3 fatty acids. And so balanced together, we see that these people living in the Scottish Isles had those broad faces that we've talked about, wider nostrils, something that we can't do. All of the dietary gurus in this country, whether they're talking about a paleo diet or an Atkins diet or an alkaline diet or a raw diet or a vegan diet, whatever the case might be, look around and look at their children and identify a single child born to any of these diets that have all their teeth straight, wisdom teeth emerging. It's a very simple thing. Indigenous people did it all around the world until they started eating modern food. And so I just want one person to step forward and say, yes, here it is. No braces, all teeth emerge, broad nostrils, and then I will follow that diet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aaron.
So it's not so much necessarily about grains. It's more of how the grains are produced. So you're talking about grains that are cultivated through nature.
It's the whole diet that people have to focus on. And so if you eat a lot of grain, well, you would have to eat a lot of something else grains can be nutrient dense, but there would be problems relying on them too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we look at the whole diet. I mean, the Anishinaabe here on this continent relied heavily on wild rice. There were two species of wild rice that grew.
Aaron's got one of them.
That grew in their area.
I'm working on it.
And you had one of those.
Itch your head.
Yeah, you had one of those tonight. You had Zizania palustris, the northern wild rice.
Watch your mouth.
Yeah. And that's a grain, right?
Yeah.
And that's a really important food in this house. It's one of the wild staples that we gather in abundance and store. And I mean, I can't tell you generationally for me what that rice does, but I can tell you generationally for them, they were able to produce happy, healthy, and well-formed children using this grain as a staple. So because it wasn't eaten in paleo time, who cares? We have photographic evidence that they could form properly formed babies. They could make properly formed babies eating this grain.
Yeah, I think there's kind of an interesting. By the way, I only ate those grains because Arthur had me at arrow point.
Yeah.
No, just
wait,
kidding.
you went up for seconds.
I ate them willingly. I did. Yes. But I think the interesting point here is that there's kind of a conundrum developing here. Is that the paleo diet is better for Neolithic people because they have to so far overcompensate not only for currently for what they're eating, but for what has been eaten in their past, and also for what their options are. For me, I just don't do it. I avoid processed foods because I know I can't trust them. Now, of course, I'm going to eat what Arthur makes because I know he collected it himself. He's processed it properly, and we're also getting. With the venison, we're also getting the extra omega-3s. We're getting the CLAs, all these other types of fats. So it's paleo, I think, does really well for the modern person today who does not have the skills that you have. And I think that's the interesting thing.
Who's previously overweight, dealing with things like diabetes and whatnot, get them back to a baseline.
Yeah, and stressed lifestyle. So you have to kind of overcompensate. So they have to say, listen, I can't eat any processed foods. I can't eat any grains because for now, my omega-6, omega-3 ratio is way off. My heavy metal toxicity is way off. My stress in my daily life is way off. I don't have this connection to nature. So for me, I found a huge benefit just getting rid of all the grains because it made it easier.
Right. What I wish that we did, though, is the paleo diet as written about in various books that we can buy, that should not be considered peak nutrition. That should not be considered the best diet on the planet. Right. That should be considered a good diet, and it is. And again, any diet, I don't care what diet it is, if it advocates for eating whole, organically or conscientiously raised foods, you will see health benefits from that. So that's any diet. But the point is, the supermarket foods don't represent the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet.
Certainly not.
So what we want to do is recognize that that is a direction you go, but it doesn't stop there. Instead of buying shelled Asian walnuts or something like this, right?
Wow.
at the store, ultimately the goal should be to get to gathering your own tree nuts, whatever they may be. Acorns are a big one in this part of the world, and learning to process them so that you can have foods that are truly nutrient dense and offer you huge freedoms.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing more free than that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I was thinking about earlier, though, when I was talking about grains. We're certainly not advocating that people go out and start eating like whole grain Cheerios or elbow macaroni from the grocery store.
That's different because
that's not what Arthur is
that's
saying.
undergone processing and, in fact, has massive amounts of oxidized omega-6 fatty acids because of the high pressure and high temperature. I'm talking about wild collected grains that are prepared properly.
I wanted to make sure we made that point because
No,
I could see a lot of people saying like,
"Well, hey, why not?"
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to eating spaghetti. Arthur said it's cool. We always ate grains, and I'm eating mac and cheese tonight for dinner.
Right.
Because
again, we're talking about a genetically modified organism that's being consumed, that's been highly processed and often damaged through storage or processing, so that you're actually eating a really unhealthy food from many perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Right. Arthur's basically keeping it real in terms. Arthur's, on so many different levels, but he's saying, look, I think there's this huge backlash that you notice this in anything. Once something comes up, it amasses, whatever movement it is. So say it's the paleo movement, it amasses this huge momentum. It becomes mainstream, as we call it, and then everybody goes, grains are evil,
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Arthur's saying is look, yes, okay, the grains that we have today, that we were exposed to today as the base of your diet, are not optimal, but what he's saying is let's not go over the top here.
Yeah, in other words, let's not label them as non-paleo because they were paleo.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, again, a wild grain such as potentially wild rice or earlier cultivated forms. For example, if someone wanted to consume wheat, there are older types like spelt that are less modified. They are less removed from their ancestral forms. And there are many, many examples of more heirloom grasses that people could incorporate in their diet as a small portion of that diet. And once they learned how to process them, particularly to deal with phytic acid, a really important anti-nutrient, it can become part of a nutrient-dense diet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure we touch on everything we wanted to touch on. Did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, the thing that keeps coming up for me is processed foods, because you hear that a lot, sort of the demonization of that, especially within the paleo community. But from what you talk about, foods even in Aboriginal ancestral cultures were often processed to some degree.
The rice that you had tonight was processed.
Yeah.
That word, using your word from a moment ago, has become demonized because we think of that as when things get milled and nutrients get stripped away, or when we add certain chemicals and these kinds of things, that's processing. And it is, but that's highly processed, and those are processing forms that were only recently able to be performed because of the machinery and our knowledge of chemicals that we have today. A lot of wild foods require processing. Acorns are leached to remove the anti-nutrient, the tannins from them, so that when we consume them, they don't rob our body of minerals. Right. That's a form of processing. The wild rice that you had tonight was soaked. Mm-hmm. And it was soaked to deal with phytic acid, another anti-nutrient. Cooking is a form of processing because there are some toxins that are rendered inert with heat. For example, if we were to take choke cherries, this is a great example. If people were to consume a lot of the seed, the quote pit, inside of a choke cherry, it could potentially deactivate respiratory enzymes.
Wow.
So there's this compound called prunacin that is in the pit is a serious toxin. But Native Americans consumed the pits in massive quantities. And they actually were nourished by it because in the seed of a choke cherry is where the vitamin E is.
Wow.
Massive amounts of vitamin E, which, remember, it's a fat-soluble antioxidant. It works with vitamin C, which is the water-soluble one, to protect every cell in your body. Right. Vitamin C is in the liquid in the interior, and vitamin E is in the cell membrane.
And glutathione helps recycle those.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so they consume these. Well, wait a second, but they're poisonous, right? Well, no. What we found is they would crush up all of these choke cherries and dry them. And drying, another form of processing, reduced the levels of prunacin, this toxin. And if there were any questions remaining, there were even some tribes in the United States that would then mash these dried fruits together and cook them on the coals, and prunacin is rendered inert by heat. So these are all forms of processing that goes on, and it's really common with wild foods. Our society is used to phytochemically blanded foods coming to them.
Yeah.
They're used to foods that have been genetically modified through breeding, that have lost their phytochemistry. They're not bitter anymore. They all taste wonderful. They're juicy, they're sweet, etc. And they have forgotten that wild plants need to be processed.
Yeah.
And so this gives birth to something like a raw vegan diet, which, again, this is not a judgment, but it cannot be done on wild plants.
Yeah.
Not year round. Mm-hmm. Because there's too much processing that needs to be done.
I think that's a sobering thing for a lot of people, because I think there's this glorified idea that you can just walk out in the woods and just pick things. In a lot of things you can.
And some you can.
A lot of things you can. But
some of the big staples, you can't.
To actually survive, not even flourish, but just to survive,
yes.
It's going to require some processing, is what you're saying.
Yes. I mean, think about the acorn, which is one of my favorite things to talk about regarding the paleo diet. It was
everywhere, right?
Yeah, it was consumed by paleo people. It was something that was eaten in northern Africa, Europe, Asia, North America, literally around the world. I've never seen a single paleo author tell people how to eat acorns. Right? And here you have this paleo food that was eaten then, and it's still available today. But the paleo authors have really taken the path to, and there's some logic to this, get people to go to the supermarket to buy the foods that best mimic, because obviously that's what most people have access to. Mm-hmm. But they stopped there and didn't share with them that we could go further with this diet if we wanted to. But if we take the acorn and we look at the fact that there were California groups that ate acorns, 50% of their calories through the year came from the acorn. But it all had to be processed, and it was frequently cooked by those people that ate it. Right? Huh. I mean, you can't just walk out and eat them.
No, I've tried.
And a lot of people who are used to the white oak group that actually taste less bitter and feel less astringent, there are still anti-nutrients within them that need to be processed out. But our palates and our poor intuition regarding foods today, they don't realize that, and so they consume them unprocessed. Mm-hmm. They actually remove nutrition from their body when they do that.
So we're at about 53 minutes in. What else do you want to try to keep this around roughly? I know, Arthur, do you want some stuff? You want to say some stuff also? No?
No.
I don't want to rush us. We're not rushing this. I know we don't want to make an actual movie.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, I mean, I have other questions depending upon how long we want to go for.
No, let's go.
Let's do a few more.
All right.
Yeah, let's do it, Aaron.
So
keep it real.
Keep it really real on this one. Just to jump gears maybe a second off of nutrition. And we talked earlier about there's this concept, this sort of misnomer that we're all just going to get older and increasingly unhealthy, and it's normal for us to inherit all these illnesses and feel generally miserable in modern life. I think there's also this notion of, and I think that's almost part of what we just understand as human nature, some people.
Right.
And I think beyond that is this we have this misconception about human nature that we're inherently greedy, evil, that we cannot be egalitarian, I guess, so to speak, that there's this notion that humans are just inherently bad. And this is demonstrated if you just look in the modern world. You watch the news for 5 minutes and there's all these horrible things going on. Just complete inconsideration for, humans, for other humans and the world in general. Do you have any, sort of perspective on that from your understanding of?
Remember, you're dealing with people who are, in many cases, severely malnourished, right? And we know that malnourishment can create depression and psychotic behaviors. Not to mention, a lot of people who are familiar with Weston Price's work recognize that our mouths are too small to fit all of our teeth in them, right?
Mm-hmm.
We simply did not have the nutrition to fill out to what we should have grown to.
Right.
Well, if this part is too small, and that's part of our skull, why do we think that what's inside here had room to develop properly?
That's true. Yeah.
You see where I'm going?
Yeah, totally.
And so who knows what aspects of our brain
Just saying it.
was not able to form properly as a result. But also you have to remember that these people have been enculturated in a very egotistic lifestyle. We're to go off and we're to succeed and we're to make a buttload of money regardless of what harm it does to the rest of the world, to other people. I mean, you look at most of the wealthiest people in our country, I mean, they could potentially be described as sociopaths. There's maybe they exist, but I don't know any of them that didn't get to where they did without massive damage to the environment.
Yeah.
And they got to have, 6 houses and go on all these wonderful vacations. But what did that really do for the world? The fact is, we do know that on average, and of course there's always exceptions because there was a great diversity of, quote, primitive people. I'm talking about indigenous people living their traditional lifestyles. There was a huge diversity, and so there's always exceptions. But we do know that they lived in small groups. They knew everybody in the group, in that band of people, they had close connection to. They were more egalitarian. They shared their resources, and they had to. They worked together. When you live in a city of 6 million people, it's just everybody for themselves because you're dealing with limited resources because our population has grown to such a ridiculous extent, right? I mean, I've read accounts of Native Americans taking slaves during warfare, bringing back prisoners, and these other tribes became slaves. But they slept in the exact same quarters as the other people in the group did. In other words, you could not have told who was a slave based on what they wore and where they slept and what they ate. They were still, based on or compared against how we treated our slaves, they had much better lives. So you were talking about healthier people. You were talking about happier people. I heard a wonderful program on public radio. A survey was done asking American people, are you truly happy?
Yeah.
Only 25% of the people answered that they were truly happy. Now, I want you to remember this, or think about this. The United States is up there with China in terms of being one of the most environmentally damaging countries on the planet. Not because we're inherently bad. In many cases, people simply don't even know that they're doing this because that's not where we put our awareness to. But we do. I mean, we take 25% of the world's resources for only 10% of the population.
Right.
The most eco-conscientious child born in this country will still do way more damage than most kids in any other country, right?
Yeah.
And so only 25% of our country considered themselves truly happy, but yet we are ravaging the world for only a quarter of our population to be happy. It doesn't seem like that makes any sense.
I see where you're getting at. I think certainly what you're talking about is, like you said, when we live together, we're a stressed culture. We're a stressed society. So under the stress, it's hard to really go on the higher order of things and actually treat each other better. So it's always us versus them. When you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off, it's me versus them. It's not hey, I'll just let them get in front of me. It's no, that's my spot.
Right. And remember that this began early on, like the lecture that you came to see, Aaron, where our methods of child rearing are so fundamentally different from how all of our indigenous ancestors have done them. Right? We tended to children that cried. That's what our indigenous ancestors did. They responded quickly, and they soothed the child, and they did it every single time. And we're worried that that's going to make wimpy children, right? They're going to be a wimp if you don't let them, as it's called, self-soothe. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that indigenous children are certainly not wimpy. I will take any randomly picked indigenous child and any randomly picked American child and give them a set of tasks where they have to experience discomfort and labor, and we'll see who cracks first.
Sure.
Aaron.
I'm just pointing out that to describe these children that have to deal with extremes in temperature and biting insects and occasionally go hungry and do what is sometimes very difficult physical labor, we certainly can't describe them as wimpy, and they're not wimpy from an emotional perspective either. But when we apply the Ferber method and we say, I'm not going to respond to that child, I'm going to make them essentially become accustomed to not being tended by their parents, we already set up a lack of trust in the caregiver and communication barriers that goes on to create what become emotional issues. Is there any teenager that we know of that does not go through some massive crisis, some identity problem, throws massive tantrums, or unfortunately worse, becomes depressed, thinks about suicide, actually attempts suicide?
Violence.
Yeah, but remember, 1 in 10 children, or 1 in 10 teenagers in this country actually make an attempt on their life. 1 in 5 think about it. 1 in 5 think about suicide. And now if we go to an indigenous culture, remember that suicide, for those people still living on their traditional foods and their traditional lifestyle, is virtually unknown. There are no identity crises. There are no emotional problems. We see well-adjusted youth. So we start these social problems with poor nutrition and a method of raising kids that is very different from how humans have raised children. We have to remember these young babies that come into the world have expectations. And one of those obvious expectations is they're expecting that they will be fed from a breast or something that resembles a breast. They obviously have an instinct to feed in that manner, right? Yeah. Well, they also have an expectation of being held, of sleeping with their parents, which this sort of co-sleeping is something that is not accepted by a lot of parents. And they have an expectation to be tended to when they cry. Yeah. And we avoid doing a lot of those things. So we set up psychological problems from early on that manifest as young adults.
Yeah, and I kind of brought that up because I think there's some questions out there. Do we tend to romanticize indigenous cultures? Some people say that we do. Some people say, well, they were more of a model to look at what's been lost, how we act so much differently. We're so much more of a violent culture.
Whether or not we should romanticize them, I mean, we certainly do know that they were more nourished than we are. We know that they lived in a more egalitarian fashion than we did. We know that they were more self-sufficient. I mean, these are all things that I really like. Now, certainly we know that severe wounds may not be able to be treated, right? We have that ability now. So, I mean, we have pros and cons on each side of this argument. Where I think the study of indigenous people and Paleolithic people comes in is, let's understand that we are derived from them. We all have indigenous ancestors. All of us do. We just may have to go back a little further for some than for others. And built into that evolutionary pattern of how we ate, how we raised our children, how we interacted with the world, our belief systems, our spirituality. When we deviate from those patterns too rapidly, there are often unforeseen consequences.
Right.
Yep.
Agreed.
I agree. I had something really good to say. I really did. It was awesome.
Just have that conversation in your head by yourself, I guess.
So, Aaron, what else do you have to say?
Well,
Aaron.
Sorry, I do that at least once every time. I have to scream into it.
And he gets mad at me when I tell him not to swallow the mic.
Yeah.
That's my fault.
There's one other thing that's kind of, I think, a fun topic for Bo and I. We wanted to get your take on it. because Bo and I are kind of loosely involved with, I guess, and I reluctantly say the fitness community. We train some people, help people get healthier and stronger, etc. Yeah. But we have a real issue with, I guess, even the term fitness and just fitness, the fitness industry at large. It just kind of drives us crazy. And part of that is once you have this sort of perspective of how, indigenous, ancestral people lived, you realized how ridiculous a lot of modern fitness routines are. And I think that just by the fact that there's such an emphasis on fitness, it's a direct reflection to how little our modern lives demand of us. There's absolutely no fitness built into our lives at all.
Well, we have taken this vast material knowledge that we have. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable what we can construct and what we can accomplish with our engines, our appliances, our devices that we create. But, I mean, did the remote control do anything for us? Do you know what I mean? Like, we put a lot of effort into building some really complicated remote controls so that we don't have to get up.
I guess a cell phone would be like the ultimate remote control, wouldn't it be? The smartphone? You can literally do everything just by sitting down.
And so we put so much of our energy and our intellect and our creativity into tools that don't really further our health. They actually make it easier or more convenient. And those are the types of things that ultimately mean that we have to have this incredibly artificial routine of we have an entire day of not having to do any physical labor, some of us, and so then we go to a gym and we
make up for it.
we move weights around in the air. And while we're there, we are in heated or air-conditioned rooms, right? With all of this equipment, some of which is run on electricity, right? And while we're there are carpeted floors that are off-gassing various things, upholstery that has flame retardants, the paints on the walls have volatile organic compounds exposing us to cancer. And what we're doing is we're moving things around in the air.
Usually, and a lot of times in a seated position.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny, too.
Right.
You go to the gym to sit down and move your legs.
Now, some people have to do this because it's what they have access to, and I certainly would encourage that form of exercise than nothing. But again, let's not have that be the top of the mountain in terms of the best form of exercise you can get. Because even when you go there, you do relatively robotic motions. And a lifestyle on an uneven landscape, whether it be forest, prairie, there are every kind of movement that you can possibly imagine, meaning you're touching all muscle, you're moving lymph in your body for cleansing in a way that just running down the street like this doesn't accomplish, right?
Totally.
And so if you simply incorporate a more natural lifestyle where you, and I mean, there could be so many examples of this. I mean, it could range from even just splitting and stacking your own wood and carrying water to actually doing things like dragging the carcass of the deer that you've just shot. I mean, that is incredibly tiring work if anyone has ever done that. Or chopping a hole in ice to get water. Or remembering that it wasn't that it was all about strength training, that indigenous and paleo people traveled miles and miles and miles. They just walked. It wasn't about how far they ran. They walked everywhere. And so, I don't know, the whole gym scene, which again, I understand there are people that need to do that, but there is a better scene, and it would be one that's done outside so you can have exposure to fresh air and sunlight.
Yeah, and we try to create a bridge to that because obviously people are probably saying, well, I can't hunt my own deer. I don't hunt my own deer. I can't wait till I hunt a deer to get a workout in type of thing.
What if I don't shoot a deer?
Right, and there's a lot of people that are very intelligently trying to mimic some movements of people in the natural world into their workout. So it's not just a mechanized workout that they're doing in the gym on a machine. Bo and I relate here to that. Just the simple fact of being outside. completely changes your workout, especially if there's sunlight, you're absorbing vitamin D, getting
forest cleansing, vitamin D.
Yeah, but not to mention, I mean, even that vitamin D that's landing on you is sterilizing your clothing of pathogenic bacteria. We're forgetting that the UV light is one of the ways that we keep ourselves free of pathogenic organisms. I mean, there's so many advantages to doing this outside. So point totally taken. Not everyone can do that, and I get that. But I would hope that people would be striving toward that end when their living condition or the location that they live allows.
Yeah.
I think the whole point is what Aaron and I have been trying to say is it's about taking accountability for yourself, thinking about things, recognizing that things need to change for most of us, and taking the, I don't want to say proper steps, but taking the best step for you, for what you've been researching. And I think resources like Arthur they're invaluable. And Arthur offers his foraging classes. Remember, he does everything by himself. So he'll tell you what it takes. Right now, he's gathering sap for maple syrup. You know, just by living, like what Arthur's saying, just by taking these steps to actually start to be more accountable, to do things on your own, whatever that may be, if it's hunting, if it's gathering, it's foraging, or even just going out for a walk and engaging nature a little bit. Just by doing that will relieve some of that need to go and slave on that treadmill for hours.
My partner and I now, because we don't use plastic tubing to collect our sap, we gather it all in pails. Our sugar bush is a distance from our home, and we have to carry that all. And so there's substantial work out lugging 5-gallon pails of sap around for, we're not talking massive distances, but it's a half-mile round trip that we'll be doing, and we'll sometimes do that twice a day. So there's a distance that is certainly involved in that. But that's the kind of thing that we have decided that's an activity that we want, because we get a sweetener. Sweeteners are also paleo, by the way. We get a nutrient-dense wild sweetener, maple syrup, that we make ourselves, that we get nature connection while we're doing that. And that term gets thrown around so much, but people have to remember that we are fundamentally wired to be in nature. And there are a lot of ways that we can discuss this, but we can even talk about studies that have shown if hospital patients have a view out a window of trees or a field, that on average they will heal faster than people who have a view onto a parking lot or some other building. I mean, we really are...
Or TV. That's it. They just watch TV.
We are fundamentally wired to be in nature. And when we break that pattern, when we divorce ourselves of nature, we do things not because we're evil and malicious, but because we simply don't have an awareness of what our actions do anymore, because we didn't live in that setting where we can see action A leads to result B.
Yes. So maybe we leave with sort of a parting thought here?
Yeah,
we've been going for
quite a while. I think we should.
So, just to wrap it up, I guess, we want you to tell people where they can find you and about Delta Institute and a little bit more about what you do before we go. But just to kind of finish off, I wanted to get your take. I mean, we talked a little bit about the whole prepper situation, preparing for the apocalypse.
Right.
I've been thinking and talking a lot lately about where is all this going. I mean, we have people that are ill. We see the natural world disappearing, where humans are an incredibly destructive species. Where do you kind of see this going?
Well, I'm wondering, are you kind of getting at, does it make any sense to even try?
Yeah, Aaron, stop dancing around the point.
No, I don't. I personally...
Easy now.
No, I think, I heard in your lecture, and I agree with you, that it always is worth it to try. But I'm just wondering, outside of that, even if there's subsections of people that are always going to try, just based on what you know, where do you think things are heading? Do you have any thoughts at all about state of the earth, humanity, anything? I know it's a big, crazy question, but
no, that's a good question.
Any thoughts on that?
It is, and there are so many things that are outside of my realm of expertise that factor into this. Economics is going to be a really important part of what happens to not only this country, but the other developed countries around the world. The political scene is huge. I mean, whether we engage in wars and end up upsetting the world community depends on a political process that I'm not always keenly wanting to be involved in.
Yeah.
And I don't, we talk about this massive collapse and, things are just going to go to hell all at once. And that could certainly happen. I don't think that's the path that we're on. Unfortunately, I think we're on what could be considered a worse path. I think that what we're seeing right now is we're living in a very unsustainable way. And in doing so, we are polluting heavily. We are stripping the world of its resources. I mean, our country imports its resources now in great amounts from other countries, other undeveloped countries. So we've stripped a lot of our forests, and now we're relying on Brazil to continue stripping its forests so that we can have products, right? And this is simply, if there is no change in awareness, if we don't start planning long-term instead of short-term, I mean, people are all about what do you do for me right now when they speak to their politicians. I mean, we ultimately need to have politicians that say, not that I don't care about you, but I care more about your children. Because those are the decisions that generally are much more helpful to us in the long run. Right? Yeah. And so without a massive change in awareness or a change in regulation that forces short-sighted people to act in a long-sighted manner, what will happen is we'll continue having large families and lots of children, overpopulate the planet, strip it of its resources. The prices of food and clean water will go through the roof, and can you simply imagine
the chaos?
Massive slums of people who are scraping for every bit of clean water and food that they can get their hands on. Natural areas have been stripped. I mean, it's just we've seen this happen on island populations, and we have essentially populated the world to the point that we are now on this island floating in the universe here, and we're just doing the same thing all over again. We know what's happening,
right?
But we're not demanding anything be done about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I get to too. Is can 7 billion people ever live sustainably? Is there any,
Well, 7 billion probably can't, or at least not with the values that we have. But we don't have to be here with 7 billion people. If people simply have fewer children, and this is really important, have them later in life, right? Because if you wait until you're 30 to have a child, in 60 years, there's 2 generations that have passed. If you have children at 20 years, in 60 years, 3 generations have passed. There's that many more people on the planet. So have them both later in life, regardless of what the geneticists tell you, because food can protect against many of those sorts of genetic ailments that we might worry about, and have fewer kids. That we have to start there, because we've put too many people on this planet who live in a Western style.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, I think that's good. I think we covered a lot
for a while.
Yeah, we covered a lot, and once again, we have to say thank you to Arthur, because
we really appreciate it.
This was amazing. It's great to have someone like yourself that's working behind the scenes, and really, like I said, keeping it real. That's the best way that I could say it.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have this resource.
Yeah, I think none of us like dogma, and
exactly.
So much of the types of things that we're talking about and everything else can be really infused with a lot of dogma. And it's nice to cut through that so that people have can make their dietary and their lifestyle choices on accurate information rather than, again, information that is often really inaccurate.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Arthur, can you talk about the services you offer and how people can find you, contact you?
Well, I my salaried position is with the New England Wildflower Society, where I work as a research botanist. And I mention this because knowledge of plants is foremost for people learning how to be self-reliant. It's how you make your fires. It's how you feed yourself. It's how you make medicine, your hunting tools. You see where I'm going with this? Sure. And what most people run into is they simply can't identify the plants they need, or they can't find them, or they don't know the timing, the habitats they grow in. So this company that I work for does a lot of botanical education, and people might find that really interesting. Now, I also offer this through my classes at the Delta Institute of Natural History, so that our foraging classes obviously have a huge what I want to say, priority given to plant identification and ecology, because obviously plants can't run away from us. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that we don't express gratitude for those gifts, but when we are trying to survive or trying to thrive, plants are often a first source that we go to for our food, our medicine, our tools, etc. And so the types of classes that we do here are a lot of foraging and wildcrafting medicine, but also there is primitive living skills offered here, and these ancestral life ways, these ancient technologies, which are by no means primitive but are sometimes extremely complex, really offer people a way to have true self-reliance. Not to mention, I mean, it doesn't all have to be about that. They're just really fun. And Bo, you can speak to that with the stuff that you did.
Yeah.
And so
it's freeing, by the way. Yeah. Let's say that.
Offering classes in bow making and brain tanning buckskin so we can make fabrics and clothing. I mean, these are all the kinds of things that I like to do here. And the classes are starting to expand and incorporate some both awareness and philosophy into them bit by bit. I find that's really helpful for people because it tends to be much more eye-opening when the class on wild edibles is infused with some philosophy that is very different than what is spoken in our sort of standard culture, our standard conversations.
Yep.
Excellent.
Agreed.
Well, ArthurHaines.com. Check that out, and obviously existanew.com.
Oh yeah,
you should check that out.
By the way,
yeah.
That's cool.
So yeah, we're gonna get this going. So I guess the last thing that we would say is start thinking about things a little more deeply. I guess, or just learn how to speak.
You didn't think about that very deeply.
Just learn how to speak. First, learn how to speak so you don't sound like me.
Thanks again to Arthur. We really appreciate
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, well, we'll hopefully do this again.
All right.
And I'll bring my boots next time.
Yeah.